In 1954, an insurance man in Dayton, Ohio, walked into a Christmas party where he knew exactly one person. He left 2 hours later with 3 lunch invitations, a standing seat at the Thursday card game, and the phone numbers of 2 women he had never met before that night. He was not handsome. He was not rich. What he had was a set of rules, 15 of them his father drilled into him before he was old enough to shave. He never raised his voice once that evening. Women remembered his name for years. Men asked his opinion for the rest of his life. Most of what he knew died in a hospital bed in 1988. They moved through a room differently, not with lines practiced in a mirror, not with confidence pulled from a book, with habits worn so deep that the men who had them never thought of themselves as charming. They thought they were being polite. Every gesture meant something. Every word was weighed before it left the mouth. A man learned how to enter, how to listen, how to leave, the way he learned to walk until he could no longer feel himself do it. Then the 1970s came, and we called it phony. We told our sons charm was manipulation and manners were a mask, and that the goal was to just be themselves. Loneliness has climbed in a straight line ever since. Number 19 took less than 4 seconds and made a woman feel for a whole evening like she was the only person in the building. Number 11 contradicts every piece of dating advice sold today, and it worked on women who had heard every line in the book. And number 2, the rule fathers guarded more closely than any other, built more lasting marriages in working-class America than any church, any matchmaker, or any advice column ever printed. These 25 rules were not about being smooth. They were about being remembered. The difference between a man who filled a chair and a man a whole room turned toward. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 lost 1950s gentleman charm rules that made women swoon and men listen. Number 25. The doorway pause. Before you stepped through, you stopped for one breath at the threshold, let your eyes cross the room, found the host, then walked in. For a young man arriving alone, that breath was armor, proof he had decided to be there. An insurance man in Dayton did this in 1954, and people turned toward him before they knew why. 3 seconds at the door was not hesitation. It was a man arriving on purpose. Number 24. The hat came off. Indoors, at a table, the moment a woman spoke to you, you took it off without a word and let it ride in your left hand. For a boy at his first interview, the hat coming off said he had been raised by someone who taught him this exact moment. A salesman in Columbus did this in 1951. His sons never saw him wear it past a doorway. The hat spoke before the man did. Number 23. The name early. When you learned someone's name, you used it inside the first minute, once to greet them, once in the middle of a sentence, easy and plain. For a widow who had not heard her own name, said kindly since the funeral, a stranger using it could be the most human moment of her week. A teacher in Albany did this in 1953. He never forgot a person he had met once. The trick was not the memory. It was making the name matter. Number 22. The street side walk. When you walked beside a woman, you took the side nearest the traffic. The mud, the noise, the splash of a passing car were yours, and you changed sides at every corner. She rarely noticed. She only felt, without knowing why, that walking with him was easier than walking alone. A bank teller in Providence did this in 1950, mid-sentence, never breaking his thought. He never once asked to be thanked. Number 21. He rose to his feet. When a woman came to the table or an elder entered, you stood, not halfway, all the way up. For an old man used to being looked past, a younger one rising said, "You are still someone a room stands for." A druggist in Akron did this in 1952, so often his children thought he could not help it. A person had entered, and a person was worth the trouble of his whole body. Number 20. The coat. When she arrived, you took her coat. When she left, you held it open and had it there before she reached for it. For a woman who spent her days carrying everyone else, 10 seconds of being tended to could undo a hard week. A foreman in Toledo did this in 1955. He could read a woman's shoulders in a dim room. Charm was never the grand gesture. It was the small one, done on time. Number 19. The 4-second hand. When you took a man's hand, the eyes came with it. Not a glance, not a look past him at the door. For less than 4 seconds, he was the only person alive to you. A man used to being processed by everyone he met would feel, in that grip, the rare thing of being met. A union organizer in Flint did this in 1954. Workers signed on after one handshake. A shake without the eyes is just 2 hands touching. Number 18. The low voice. You never raised it. When the room got loud, you let your voice drop, and the room leaned in to catch it. For men a foot taller and twice as loud, that quiet was unnerving. It was the sound of a man who did not need their permission. A radio repairman in St. Louis did this in 1953, and larger men stopped talking when he started. Volume was the tool of a man with nothing worth saying quietly. Number 17. Settle it in private. When you had a grievance, you carried it to the person alone, never across a crowded table, never in front of her friends or his. You took him by the elbow and spoke low. The man corrected in a doorway kept his pride. The man shamed in front of others remembered it for life. A floor manager in Detroit did this in 1954, and the matter always ended in the doorway. The difference cost nothing but patience. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. A man today is far more likely to reach 50 with no one to call than his grandfather was, and the number climbs every year. Not because these men are cold, not because they are unlovable. Somewhere after 1965, we stopped handing boys a set of rules and handed them a mirror instead. No father drilled the doorway paws into them. No years of small corrections wore the manners down into reflex. A man with nothing built into him has nothing to express. The rules were never a cage. They were the scaffolding that held a man up while he learned to stand. We tore it down to set him free. He has been falling ever since. Number 16. Made the introduction. When 2 people you knew had not met, you brought them together and gave each a reason to talk, not just the names, but a line about who they were. For a shy man stranded at the edge of a party, a good introduction was a rope thrown into the room. A grocer in Cincinnati did this in 1950, and the people he introduced kept talking long after he drifted off. He never took the credit. He just made the room less lonely. Number 15. Remembered the small thing. When a person let a worry slip, a sick mother in October, you held it. And in December, you asked how her mother was. That was what made a woman's breath catch. Not that he was clever, but that he had listened when he did not have to. A pharmacist in Buffalo did this in 1952. He kept the small things people said the way other men kept receipts. To remember the worry was to tell someone they had been heard. Number 14. The pulled-out chair. When a woman came to sit, you were already there, hand on the chair, easing it in behind her. Half the time she never registered the help, only that sitting down had felt easy, that someone knew the moment she needed it. A clerk in Omaha did this in 1953, so smoothly the women he seated rarely caught him. Charm was the small thing, done before it was asked for. Number 13, walked her all the way. You did not say goodnight at the curb. You walked her to the door, waited until the lock turned, and only then went home. For a woman who had been dropped at 100 curbs, the man who waited for the lock was the one she could not stop thinking about. A streetcar man in Cleveland did this in 1951, in the rain, for women who lived nowhere near his street. The evening was not over until she was safe. Number 12, praised the doing, not the face. When you complimented a woman, you reached past the easy thing, not how she looked, but what she had made, what she had said, what she had done. She remembered the man who praised her sharp argument long after she forgot the men who called her pretty. A school teacher in Richmond did this in 1954 at tables full of men who only saw the surface. The man who noticed the mind was the one she could not forget. Number 11, left the silence alone. When the conversation went still, you did not rush to fill it. You let the pause sit, held her eye, and waited. Everything the modern world teaches says to keep talking, keep the room moving, never let it drop. He knew the opposite. A photographer in Nashville did this in 1955, and women trusted him before they could explain why. The pause was not empty. It was where the trust grew. Number 10, the clean shave. However broke you were, you walked out the door, shaved clean and combed, even when heading to a shift no one would dress up for. A clean jaw on a poor man told the world that whatever the week had taken, it had not taken his self-respect. A dockhand in Baltimore did this in 1949 by a cracked mirror in the dark before dawn. Money he could not always control. The razor he could. Number 9, the shined shoes. One pair of shoes, and you made them catch the light, sitting at night with a rag and a tin until they did. His shoes outshone men who earned 3 times his wage, and a woman's eye found them first. A mill hand in Lowell did this in 1948. The shine was the last thing other men's judgment forgave. A shined shoe on a worn suit said, "Here is a man who finishes what he can reach." In the 1990s, researchers set out to measure first impressions, certain the modern, well-coached adult would come out ahead. The numbers refused to cooperate. Strangers decide whether to trust a man in a fraction of a second, and that judgment, once set, holds for months against new evidence. What tips it is, the old furniture, the steady eye, the unhurried hand, the body that stops and turns to face you. Later work found that genuine, unrushed eye contact triggers the same chemistry that bonds a parent to an infant. The men of 1950 never read a word of it. They had run the experiment 10,000 times, on porches and factory floors. The rules worked, not because they were old, because they were correct. Number 8, asked one real question. You did not interview a person. You asked one question that mattered and let the answer take its time. Most people had not been asked a real question in months, so the man who asked one and meant it became the rarest thing in the room. A barber in Memphis did this in 1953. He asked a man what he had wanted to be at 20, and the man talked for an hour and called it the best night of his year. Not the most interesting man, the most interested one. Number 7, defended the absent. When the talk turned to running down someone who had stepped out, you would not join. You changed the subject or said one fair word for them. A woman watching him refuse to pile on knew the kind of man she was sitting with, one whose loyalty did not depend on the door. A warehouse man in Toledo did this in 1954, and people learned they could leave the room and keep their good name. To tear at the absent is to warn everyone present what you do when they go. Number 6, the steady hands. You did not fidget, no drumming fingers, no jangling keys, no checking the watch. When you sat, you were still. Still hands told a woman there was nowhere he would rather be than here, and told other men he could keep his head. A judge's clerk in Hartford did this in 1950. His calm filled a room the way other men's nerves emptied one. Stillness was a respect a man paid with his body. Number 5, took the blame, shared the credit. When the work went wrong, you stepped forward alone. When it went right, you stepped back and named the others. The men who listened to him most closely were the ones who had watched him take a fall that was not his. A crew chief in Houston did this in 1955, and his men would have followed him into a fire. It cost him his pride and bought him loyal men for life. Number 4, the good exit. You did not vanish from a gathering. You found the host, said one warm and specific thing, and left while people still wished you would stay. He was the man everyone remembered as having stayed longer than he had, the leaving as deliberate as the arriving. A pressman in Kansas City did this in 1952 and was missed before the door had closed. The first 3 seconds made the entrance. The last 3 made the memory. Number 3, stood for what was bigger than him. When the flag passed, when a funeral rolled by, when the anthem played, you stopped and stood, hat off, eyes up. A man who could bow his head to something greater than himself was a man others trusted to keep his head about everything else. A barber in Richmond did this in 1951. He stepped out of his shop mid-cut and stood for a hearse carrying a stranger. To keep walking was to say nothing was bigger than you. Number 2, he kept his word to her. The small promises, the ones no one would have held him to. Home by 6. The shelf fixed by Sunday. You kept them, everyone, until she stopped wondering whether a thing you said would happen. To break a small promise teaches a woman slowly that the large ones are also air. To keep them builds a floor she can stand on for life. A mill foreman in Gastonia did this in 1952, and in 30 years his wife never once doubted him. More marriages were built on this one quiet rule than on any vow spoken at any altar. Number 1, he gave you his whole attention. That is the entire rule. No method, no mirror, no count in his head. When you spoke, he stopped everything else and looked at you, and stayed there until you were finished. Not at his watch, not over your shoulder at the door, at you. A woman who had not been truly looked at in years would feel it land like warmth. A man used to being half heard would straighten up and choose his words with more care. This was the rule beneath all the others. The hat, the handshake, the chair, the kept word. Everyone was only this rule wearing a different coat. Stop, look, stay. Do it every day, for years, until it stops being a thing you do and becomes muscle memory. And the muscle memory becomes the man. The whole of charm, in the end, was the willingness to make another person feel like the only one in the room, and to mean it. None of these rules required money. None of them needed a fine name, a diploma, or a single thing a poor man could not afford. They asked only that a man decide what he was and refused to be anything less. The generation that came up through the Depression and the war understood something we have spent 60 years trying to forget. That being liked is not the same as being respected. That being noticed is not the same as being remembered. That a man who fills a room with words has done nothing, while a man who can go quiet and pay attention has done everything. These were not the habits of charmers and phonies. They were the habits of decent men who chose every day to make the people around them feel seen. The rules are still there, exactly where that generation left them. The only thing missing is the man willing to pick them back up. He could be anyone. He could be you.